All right, Alexander, let's talk about Emperor Joe. Emperor Joe and his decree to to take care of inflation, to bring inflation down. Look, when I studied economics, I learned one very important principle, and that is that when Joe Biden says inflation needs to come down, then it does come down. This is probably one of the most important principles of economics, physics, nature, you name it. What do you make of Joe Biden's decree to suddenly say, you know what, we need to bring inflation down, so I order by decree that inflation come down. He's in a big, all jokes aside, he's in a big freaking mess. Big mess. Actually, I read an article before you begin, Alexander, that the 1.5 trillion or 1.2 trillion is actually more like 4 to 5 trillion at the end of the day. He's in a world of mess. What's going on here?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Now, I mean, obviously, there's the first law of economics, which you just described. Biden orders prices to fall, so they promptly fall. We had a king in England, King Canute, who once ordered the ocean tide to reverse itself, and of course, it promptly reversed itself when he ordered it. I'm afraid, just as it didn't quite work out that way for King Canute, it's not going to work that way for Joe Biden either. You can't just order inflation to go down. You have to understand why there is inflation. Now, the inflation numbers are getting ever worse in a way that exactly tracks what we predicted right at the start of the administration, at the start of this year. We always said that he is overstimulating. He is massively overstimulating. He is ludicrously overstimulating an economy which at the start of the year was already growing and growing fast. He took over a growing economy. It didn't need stimulus. But of course, he gave it stimulus. He gave it monetary easing. He gave it, with his friends at the Fed, more QE. He wants to replace the Fed chairman with somebody who will give it even more QE. And of course, he's had one fiscal program after another. And we now got this humongous so-called infrastructure program, which isn't an infrastructure program, but is going to send even more money sloshing through the system. Now, the real first law of economics, the true first law of economics, is that if there is more money than goods, if there is more demand than supply, prices rise. And that is what is happening. Now, he can't change that. He's not in a position to change fundamental economic laws of that nature. I mean, things that are so basic in that form. Well, he can do it, but he first has to acknowledge the existence of that law. He would have to either increase supply, very difficult, given that the economy is to all intents and purposes, maxed out and is facing all kinds of bottlenecks and supply issues, which, by the way, the growth in demand is making worse. So if he can't fix supply, what he needs to do is reduce demand. But he's doing the opposite. He is increasing demand all the time. And of course, demand is also getting ever more skewed because as prices rise, that hurts living standards of poorer people, of working class and middle class people. And of course, the stimulus that you're seeing is going increasingly to big corporations, to big companies. So it's increasing inequality. The very opposite of what, of course, he said he's going to do. But nonetheless, he persists in doing it. Since he's not going to reverse his policies, since he's not going to take action to bring demand back in balance with supply, what I suspect he's actually going to do, and what we're going to see over the next few weeks, and Mohammed Al-Aryan has written about this in the Financial Times, what he's most likely to do is he's going to start imposing price controls. Now, imposing price controls, price ceilings, it's been shown everywhere, all that does is create shortages because it creates a black market. I use that word straightforwardly for goods because you will see prices can't adjust using the normal price mechanism. It breaks down supply and demand. When the price mechanism breaks down, you will start to see shortages start to appear and intensify. If you remember the films, the pictures of empty shops in the former Soviet Union in the years leading up to its collapse, that was because of inflation. That was because there was a major imbalance between supply and demand, and the Soviet government tried to address that problem with price controls. They had price controls, supply and demand in the Soviet Union started to break down in the late 1960s. It got steadily worse across the 1970s and 1980s. The Soviet leadership attempted to control that by imposing price controls, by maintaining price controls. And the result was shortages in all the shops and ultimate breakdown of the entire economy. Well, Biden is going down the same route.
Let me ask you a question. I saw a video, Mr. Reagan, on his YouTube channel, and I'll give a shout out to him because that's where I saw his video, where he put the question forward. I guess it's a theory you could say, but anyway, he says his video was basically saying that the Biden White House is purposefully trying to destroy the U.S. economy. The next day, like a day or two, I saw on Laura Ingram's show on Fox News. I believe it was Laura Ingram, and she had Stephen Miller, who was the one of Trump's advisors. Specifically, he was a lawyer that was dealing specifically with the border and stuff like that. But he was a Trump aide, very close to Trump and Trump's inner circle. And he actually called what was going on. I believe it really was Stephen Miller, but I may be wrong. But anyway, he told Ingram that this is what's going on right now with the economy is econocide, like economic, suicide. He was calling it Biden is just implementing econocide. Do you think that whether deliberate or not, but do you think that the White House is trying to destroy the U.S. economy? Is this some sort of Build Back Better, Great Reset thing, or is this stupidity? But is there? I guess my question is: do you think that there may be some sort of a deliberate action to destroy things?
Well, can I just say,
moves sound really amateurish. I mean,
well, it is amateurish to the point of absurdity. But can I just make a few observations? Firstly, this is the most ideological administration I have ever known. I did a program for my channel. You can find it also on Locals about Jake Sullivan and some comments Jake Sullivan made on foreign policy, and it was pure, unadulterated globalist. World, global reset, new reset, all that kind of thinking. In fact, it was astonishing how pure and uncompromising in some ways it was. Now, that's obviously, Jake Sullivan is the National Security Advisor. He deals with foreign and security policy. But if there are people in the economic departments of the administration who have the same type of thinking, because this is an ideology that's both about economics, Sullivan actually talked about economics, and about foreign policy, the two are, and society and reshaping society and everything. It's a kind of coherent, entire economics. If there are people in the economic departments of the administration who share that same kind of mindset, then it is not impossible that they are also acting from some kind of ideological agenda. I'm going to leave it at that because I can't know what's going on inside the insides of the administration. All I will say is my usual rule is never look for an ideological explanation when you can explain something by sheer stupidity and incompetence. And in terms of politics, this is profoundly stupid. But at the same time, you have to take into account what a profoundly ideological administration this one actually is. Now, if you wanted to destabilize the US economy and break down an economy? How do you cause it to collapse? You destabilize it. If you want to destabilize your economy, they're going about it the right way. I mean, John Maynard Keynes, who's often seen by many people, I think quite wrongly, by the way. I mean, I've read his works. He's a much more intelligent and sophisticated thinker than some people say. But John Maynard Keynes, who's often seen as the person who saw the whole route to economics through demand management, as I said, that's wrong. What he said was, the worst thing you can do to your economy is to debauch your currency, to undermine your financial system. And some of Keynes's so-called disciples that you see writing about economics have taken some of his ideas, have repackaged them, altered them, corrupted them, in order to make this kind of economic policy that we're seeing now, this idea that you can endlessly stimulate demand and that's going to result in growth. They've taken that now to an extreme. Keynes would have been horrified, but that's what you're seeing. They are debauching America's currency, its price system, its financial system. They're creating instability. And of course, if you create that kind of instability, then you are putting your entire economy in jeopardy. Because, of course, there comes a point when any central bank, and the Federal Reserve Board, let's remember, is the central bank, has to make a decision as inflation numbers rise. Does it let inflation rise even further, even though that works like a kind of cancer, undermining the economy even more? Or does it try to do what Paul Volcker did in the early 1980s, slam down on the brake, raise interest rates, and as a result, precipitate a recession? But bear in mind, when Volcker did that in the early 1980s, the US government didn't owe the kind of levels of debt that it does today. Private business didn't owe the kind of levels of debt it owes today. The markets, the financial markets, weren't so extremely overextended as they are today. If we have a recession of that scale today, it will be savage.
Yeah. Well... I guess Krugman would be kind of an example of the Keynesian.
Well, absolutely.
Distorted Keynesian model, right?
He's one of the people I have in mind. As I said, he constantly claims that he is, as I said, the disciple of the genius. You should never anyway. I mean, the thing to always understand about Keynes is he was writing anyway about his time, which is the 30s and the 40s. So you must be careful about applying his prescriptions to the situation today. But I mean, there's people, as I said, like Krugman, Robert Reich, Dean Baker, who basically take the view that, you could just go on stimulating, you can increase demand, and that's somehow things are going to turn out all right because somehow, well, presumably that's what Keynes said. And as I said, supply and demand just don't apply. And I'm afraid, I think in this situation, these people are, to put it mildly, being unhelpful. Can I just say something else? I mean, we had a readout a short time ago, about unemployment falling, about more jobs increasing, about the economy growing. Well, that might simply be a reflection of the fact that there is more and more stimulus in the economy. And if that is so, then that stimulus, which has caused those unemployment figures to fall, may be the reason why the inflation readout for October was so much higher than anybody had expected. People had expected inflation at 5.9%, and an annualized rate of 5.9%, which is already, to be straightforward about it, extremely high. What we got instead was an inflation readout of 6.2%, much higher than anybody had thought. Of course, the other thing that might happen, I don't know to what extent it does. You go to people like John Williams at Shadowstat. He's done a whole web page and magazine about this. Of course, if inflation figures become too embarrassingly high, you just change the way in which inflation is added up. And of course, that will also make it seem as if inflation has gone away, even though prices are rising all the time. Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't know to what extent it already happens. But, impose price controls, fiddle the figures. That might be the route that an administration that's losing control of the economy, that's perhaps the route it might go.
Yeah, and it fits in line with this type of administration, which is more concerned with optics and managing the media and the PR than it actually is with reality. But people on the ground, everyday people, they're going to understand the reality because they're going to have to live with it. And
well, absolutely.
You're not going to be able to cover this up. One of the reasons I asked you about whether this is deliberate is because we also have the story of Biden's pick for a comptroller of the currency. And this is a top banking pick, by the way, and they're going with an individual who goes by the name of Saule Omarova. And they're making a big deal of the fact that she was born in the USSR and she went to Moscow State University. Okay, and they say she's been kind of a trained in socialism and Marxism and stuff like that. She wrote her thesis on this stuff, Karl Marx's economic analysis and the theory of revolution in the capital. Anyway, I don't think that's as important as a video that surfaced of comments that she made in March, where she says that, and let me find the quote in comments, and I'm reading this from Zero Hedge. In comments from March, which have resurfaced this week in a viral video, Omarova touted the need for a National Investment Authority, an NIA, which would, and I quote, facilitate sustainable and socially inclusive infrastructure growth, especially when a systemic crisis requires a congressional bailout. Quote, and this is the important part. Yeah, that was important. This is even more important. The NIA, the National Investment Authority, will be able to negotiate the equity stakes in private enterprise that receives that public aid, be it a part of the systemic bailout or be it a part of, for example, individualized restructuring help. For example, for certain troubled industries and firms that are in transitioning. Here, what I'm thinking about is primarily the coal industry and oil and gas industry. A lot of smaller players in that industry are going to probably go bankrupt in short order. At least we want them to go bankrupt if we want to tackle climate change. This video is resurfaced. She's up for a nomination in a key position. We have the crisis. This is, what do you make of this? This is the person he's choosing. That's why I'm saying, is this deliberate?
Yeah, well, it clearly is deliberate because he's choosing her. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, if it wasn't deliberate, he'd be choosing someone else. I mean, this is, bear in mind, this particular administration has made green issues and all that sort of thing absolutely the focus of not just its economic priorities, entire priorities. And of course they're choosing her deliberately, and of course they're choosing her because she has the opinions that she has done. I mean, if you want to go back to our earlier discussion, this is about how ideological this administration is, and about, the fact that it wants to, that there may be some people within it who actually want to create this kind of economic meltdown. Well, then you found a person with these opinions who seems to reflect that kind of thinking. So there it is. I mean, it's entirely possible. That's exactly where we're going. And of course, note again, with, investment authorities, I mean, clearly someone who hankers after some degree of central planning also, which is also quite interesting. Now, can I just make a quick observation, which is, of course, that all of Vladimir Putin's economic advisors and economic officials trained in the same universities, received exactly the same sort of training as Ms. Samoylova appears to have done. So they are, and, their Marxist economic training, which should have actually trained them in classical economics, they take the diametrically opposite view. They actually focus on macroeconomic stability. They talk about this all the time. They say that's the most important thing to preserve, to sustain an economy. Of course, they lived through what happened to the Soviet Union. They were there, as was this particular person. But she obviously has taken a different view out of all of these events than they did. And obviously she's not found much a place for her in the in Russia. So she's ended up in the United States with all these interesting ideas she's bringing with her there.
The world is upside down. But real quick, Alexander, the shutting down of even small businesses involved in oil, gas, and coal, would that be that would be a meltdown or?
Well, of course it would. I mean, what kind of government deliberately goes out of its way to bankrupt the industries that form its
But I mean, would that be a real meltdown? I mean, would that be a real?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course it will. Because, I mean, bear in mind, I mean, it's all very well saying you don't like coal, so you close down coal mines and businesses that deal with coal mines. But there's people who work in those industries. There's people who are involved in providing tools, equipment. There's a whole supply chains that are embedded in all of that. Now, some of those businesses which may be providing work for the coal industry will be providing things, services to other industries too. But you see, if they're going to lose their coal, their market in the coal industry, then that will undermine them in relation to everything else. So what you're doing is you're undermining the entire structure. You're weakening the structure of your economy. Now, if you want to transfer from one type of energy system to another, there are ways to do that. And, I'm not saying whether that's the right thing to do or a wrong thing to do. I'm saying that there are ways to do that economists know about, the macroeconomists know about, that don't unbalance the economy in that kind of way. But to deliberately go about bankrupting your own business, your own industries, your own businesses in that sort of fashion, apart from being incredibly callous, remember there are people who work in these industries, not just people who are making, heaps of money, but just, people who are actually, have jobs there, who are sell products to these businesses. Anyway, if you do that, what you're inevitably doing is you're undermining your own economic structure. You're making it less stable, which is precisely what we're talking about.
And not to mention what effect it would have on energy prices as well.
Absolutely.
For all American citizens. It's getting scary.
Absolutely.
It's getting scary, yeah.
The energy price point, of course, is an essential one because, of course, energy prices are now increasingly at the core of this. And, of course, the reason energy prices are skyrocketing is twofold. Firstly, they're caught up in the general inflation crisis. We've discussed this many times. Increased demand, supply struggles to keep up, prices rise. But as I have discussed many times, also, by the way, in articles I've done for the Duran, but also in videos and in many places, energy prices are directly connected through the petrodollar system to the position of the dollar. So the fact that energy prices are surging suggests that there is a general perception that the dollar is weakening and that there is a growing inflation crisis in the United States. So it's a negative feedback loop. People are beginning to lose confidence in the dollar, so they're putting their money in oil and other energy products. That increases inflation in the United States, which puts further pressure on the position of the dollar. So you get a negative feedback loop. The only way you can break that is if the government, the US government and the Federal Reserve Board do what Paul Volcker did, which is prioritize the defense of the dollar. But they're not going to do that.
Not with elections this close, midterms this close. They're not going to do that. No. They're going to push forward, and because of their ideological cult, their ideological obsession as well. So, yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and of course, the other thing is they don't want they don't want a recession before the midterms. Even though, in spite of the latest numbers, I suspect that when we go back, we will probably find that there's already a recession element in the economy already, but that's another story.
Yeah. So it looks like things are just going to get worse. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll leave it there. The Duran.locals.com. Look for us there. Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute, Super U. Look for our videos there as well. And the Duran shop, 10% off when you use the code Real News. You'll find that in the description box down below. Take care.